Hey everyone, I'm Jack Crawford, and it's time to review Streets of Rage 4. Now, I wasn't really expecting this one to grab me, just because it's that old school side-scrolling beat-em-up style that died out for good reason, in my opinion, because those games were generally just too similar to each other. But Streets of Rage 4 has some of those fresh design ideas that the genre desperately needed a long time ago. It's also so well executed at a basic level, it reminded me what made beat-em-ups good in the first place. Compared to most modern action games, you're pretty slow and you don't have a dodge button with invincibility frames or something like that, so it's less about reacting to enemy attacks and more about anticipating enemy attacks, thinking ahead, using good positioning and good spacing. It seems like the designers of Streets of Rage 4 understood all of that, but also understood what could be improved. The first thing any Streets of Rage fan will notice is obviously the art style, which I think is fantastic. I suspect the artists for the first three games would have gone with a style much closer to this if it had been an option. I like how the kind of chunky animations fit the comic book style. Every attack has some weight to it and feels satisfying completely on its own. Now the cutscenes on the other hand are awful. They're like the exact opposite of the excellent comic book style cutscenes in Damaged in Transit, which I reviewed recently. This game didn't need cutscenes between stages anyway, so I have to wonder why they were included when they're so low effort. Maybe the most important change is that the learning curve is so much less frustrating than the old Streets of Rage games, because you go through the whole game one stage at a time before diving into a full arcade mode attempt. It's also less frustrating because there's a surprising amount of clarity to enemy behavior. They minimize the confusing, unpredictable moments like, oh, I just got grabbed for some reason, or oh, this enemy is immune to hit stun for some reason. This game is fair on the first try in a way that most classic beat-em-ups were absolutely not. My favorite design idea is the way special attacks work. You have to risk some of your health to use them, but they can help you build some crazy combos, so you'll definitely be using them often when you're an expert, or when you think you're an expert. But it also works for low-level play as an alternative to that thing action game designers do all the time where they leave you with one health instead of killing you outright. That's a pretty artificial way to create more exciting moments and more of a perception of fairness. But here, as a natural result of how specials work, you can use them more freely when you're about to die, which creates those exciting moments and often helps you scrape by and survive with one health, which feels amazing. Another smart change is that enemies bounce off the edge of the screen instead of being sent off screen like in the old Streets of Rage games. This drastically reduces boring downtime, and you can actually use it to your advantage as part of a creative combo. There's some unexpected depth to it too, since enemies have different weights, which affects how fast they fall, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution to combo any enemy against the edge of the screen. You have to tailor your combos to each enemy, which helps spice things up. Unfortunately, there are some pretty cheap strategies you can discover that make the game less fun, and ideally stuff like that wouldn't exist at all, but it didn't hurt my experience too much. I didn't want to use boring, cheap strategies when there were tons of exciting strategies to find. I'm glad they didn't pad out the length of the game to appeal to the type of people who assume 2 hours is too short. This is a game that's meant to be replayed over and over again. It's meant to be mastered from beginning to end. You don't want to keep adding stages to this type of game if they're not doing anything new. You want as much variety as possible. You want every enemy encounter to bring something new to the table. And that's exactly how this game is. There's plenty of variety in the playable characters as well. Out of the 5 main characters, there are 2 that play sort of similarly, in my opinion, but the other 3 are very distinct without messing up the basics that make the game satisfying in the first place. Personally, I didn't want to put in tons of time to master every character, but there is definitely huge replay value there if that's what you're looking for. The soundtrack had a lot to live up to, but I think for the most part it's really good. Certainly the best moments in this soundtrack live up to the previous Streets of Rage soundtracks. And perhaps more importantly, the music follows the rise and fall of tension throughout a stage. It's not just looping a track endlessly, it's responding to your progress, which makes it hit so much harder. So all this base level stuff is great. The problems come in when you take a step back from that and look at the combo and rank systems and how they encourage you to play in less exciting, less interesting ways. Basically, you're encouraged to play super safe and prioritize never getting hit. But the point of a scoring and rank system, in my opinion, should be to push people to play in the most fun way, which in this case involves mixing it up and figuring out strategies for chaining attacks together in cool ways. And then taking another step back from that, things like the leaderboards, difficulty options, assist options could have been much simpler and much more cohesive. The leaderboards seem to indicate that lots of players work on S-ranking all the individual stages, but never try arcade mode at all, which is sad because in my opinion the game is much more enjoyable when you treat the individual stages as practice for arcade mode and nothing more. There's a lot of value in knowing what makes your game good and making that shine rather than casting a wide net to try to please as many different types of players as possible. And I think they could have done that here by emphasizing arcade mode more and de-emphasizing or even removing the ranks entirely, or maybe just removing ranks and leaderboards from individual stages. Speaking of which, the implementation of the leaderboards leaves a lot to be desired as well. The top 3 spots are always taken up by cheaters, and you can't even scroll to see what the highest real score is. It's impossible to get any useful information out of this. Fortunately, none of that prevented me from having fun with the game. Once I realized I didn't care about maximizing score, I was able to appreciate just how well designed the campaign is. I think if you're a fan of the series, this is a must-play. It's certainly my favorite Streets of Rage game. And it makes me feel like there's tons of potential for other old games to be revived with modern design sensibilities. And I'm giving Streets of Rage 4 a 7 out of 10.